Dr. Blake Layton from Mississippi State. He is an entomologist specialist. Some of the things that he focuses on, and I got this from your CV, I hope you don't mind. Insect pests of ornamental plants, vegetable insects, household and structural pests, and fire ants, which I'm sure some of that touches our lives. I'm sure one of those categories is a familiar frustration to you. So he's published numerous papers in academic journals. He's an authority in the field of and come on up whenever you're ready.
Oh, I'm getting one.
Grab these. Sarah, if you don't mind helping me out, I'll make these one.
Sure.
And this one is the rest of it. Thank you. Sarah, I appreciate that. Y'all doing all right this afternoon?
Yeah.
It looks like y'all been having a lot of fun here.
We don't know.
Yeah, I'm an avid vegetable gardener myself. If you came to my house, you can tell, well, the ornamental plants kind of get second attention, but the vegetable garden is where I spend most of my time. You can eat that. That's a big reward there. I spent several hours in my garden yesterday afternoon because I knew I was going to be on the road the next few days. And a garden, y'all know, it changes every few hours. You know, you can be caught up in the morning and behind that afternoon. But I'm glad to come up here and visit with y'all. And sometimes when I do this, I have a slide presentation that's got pictures of most of the pests. Of course, we're not able to do that in an outdoor setting. So another way to do this is just by making sure y'all have this guide. And it's a publication that I have for home vegetable gardens. And the way I set this up is it'll work for either organic growers or non-organic growers. Both types of control are mentioned in there. And a lot of times some people may start out one way and then decide, well, for this particular pest, I want to go the other way. I'm somewhere in the middle. I don't mind spraying with any of the pesticides listed in here, but there are, like my lettuce in a raised bed, I'm pretty particular what I put on that because we're picking and eating that, and it's got a big surface area, so you know that's one thing to keep in mind. As far as this publication, I want to kind of work you through it a little bit. Does everybody have a copy that wants a copy? And one of the things I want to point out, because Sarah asked me to mention this, is like non-insecticidal ways to manage pests. Well, when I think of that, I don't even think of organic. I think of non-insecticidal ways to manage pests. And there are actually quite a few. My background is I grew up on a farm in South Mississippi, and it was a diverse farm. We had cattle and hogs and chickens and row crops. And also in the summer we had a lot of commercial vegetables. And I don't think I saw my dad spray an insecticide on any of those commercial vegetables more than once or twice. He wasn't opposed to it, he just didn't like to go to the trouble of spraying, and he dealt with it by using a lot of these non-insecticidal methods, especially crop rotation. He never would plant his crops in the same field 2 successive years in a row. Now, here you don't necessarily have that option, but still it can be helpful sometimes to, I know I had tomatoes there last year, maybe I want to put the tomatoes over here and put something else where the tomatoes were. That's a practice I do tonight. Other things that are really important, really useful that y'all can do are resistant varieties. And a lot of times, if it's a variety that does well in a vegetable garden, if it's an ornamental plant that does well in people's yards, it might not say it's got insect resistance or disease resistance, but if it became an All-American Medallion winner, a Mississippi Medallion winner, All-American Selection winner, it probably does, because it's not something that insects or diseases just being really bad in there made that cut. But then the other thing I noticed, the most popular vegetable in y'all's garden and in Mississippi is tomatoes. And that's the one that has the most insect problems and the most disease problems. But that's the one where I make sure in my garden, and I don't plant every tomato is not a tomato spotted wilt resistant variety, but I make sure I have a few that are, because this tomato spotted wilt virus, it's a virus, and so that means there's no spray for it. Once the plant's inoculated with it, it's got it, and if it's a susceptible plant, it's going to show those symptoms. Now, I'm a little out of my area talking about diseases, except that tomato spotted wilt virus is spread by thrips. So those are tiny little insects. The thrips themselves aren't going to cause any real damage to the tomato. But the problem is they come from weeds that are drying down in the spring, and you got your little tomato up about that high. Here comes the thrips, it lights on the tomato, it's carrying that virus because the virus has over 1,000 different plant hosts, so it's really abundant out in nature now, and especially in nurseries. And so as soon as that thrip just probes the first time, it's inoculated the plant. Whether you spray and kill every thrips that comes within 30 minutes of their arrival, you're still likely to get tomato spotted wilt virus. So, you know, that's one reason I make sure I plant. Maybe I've got 2 dozen tomatoes in my garden this year, and about 6 of them are resistant varieties. This year I haven't had a problem with spotted wilt, but there was one year that I know 19 out of 2 dozen plants had it, and I ended up pulling them up. And the only plants I had left were the resistant plant. Well, no, that was the year before I decided to do that. I only had 5 plants left out of 24. And the next year I decided I would have some resistant varieties. Now the reason I say it's kind of a sacrifice because they don't taste as good as your favorite heirloom variety or what other variety that you like to grow. You know, I like Big Beef and Better Boy, and they're not spotted wilt resistant, but I plant them every year. I like a little one called Sun Gold too, and I see some of you, or at least somebody, has some of those out in their garden. Cherry tomato, it's not spotted wilt resistant, but I plant some of those every year also. So that's one thing you can do for spotted wilt. Another thing is, even if you say, well, you know, I'm bound and determined, I'm going to grow this heirloom variety. You know, I like my, what is the purple, Cherokee purple, I like that, or whatever you like. You know, I'm going to grow it, and I know it's spotted wilt resistant. But one thing that will help a lot, you can buy a reflective mulch, and it looks like a mirror when it's laying on the ground. And you can mulch your tomatoes with that, and there's been studies in commercial tomatoes in Florida where it reduces the incidence of spotted wilt as much as spraying every week with an insecticide to try to slow down the incidence of spotted wilt. So it's even more effective than spraying insecticides, and it reduces it significantly, like by 50% or more. And what happens is the thrips is flying over. They're being blown by the wind coming out of there. They can fly, but they're small. They have to go where the wind takes them. But when they see a tomato or something interesting, they can't orient to it. But that's reflecting the clear blue sky with that little bitty plant growing up. So they don't try to land there. They're kind of confused and they go on their way. They don't like, they don't bite, and the plant doesn't come up. So those are 2 tools for growing tomatoes that I would recommend to you. And I guess while we're on tomatoes, I'll deal with some of the other big pests of tomatoes. One that is a big problem for commercial growers, they're definitely going to treat for it. I'm absolutely going to treat for it in my garden. It's tomato fruit fly. But usually smaller plantings have less problems. So somebody growing 2 or 3 plants in their backyard in a neighborhood where there's wooden fences, the moths may not find those. You know, you may not have a problem. You may have the tobacco hornworm, the big green one, but the fruit worm may not find it. But in a setting like this, you're very likely to have them, and that's the caterpillar. They end up being about 1.5 inches long. It's the same insect that gets in the tips of corn ears. In corn, we call it the corn earworm. In tomato, we call it the tomato fruit worm. When it shows up in cotton, which is the #1 insect pest of cotton, we call it the cotton bollworm. So it's a big pest of a lot of ag crops, not just vegetables, but also row crops. And I mean, I've seen even in my garden when I neglected to spray that I had to throw every other tomato. And so it can be pretty damaging. So it's one that I make it a point to spray for. And I'll spray it usually permethrin is what I use, which is not an organic insecticide. If you want to do organic, there is an organic control that works really well on the fruit worm, and it's the active ingredient spinosad. And I'll go ahead and mention, in here on pages 11 and 12, I list most of the insecticides available for use in home vegetable gardens. I list them by the active ingredient because spinosad, I just mentioned it on page 12. Well, if you go to the garden center and I tell you, if I only tell you one brand name and I tell you that's high yield, Fertilome, borer, bagworm, leaf miner, and tent caterpillar spray. It really does have a brand name that long. And they don't have it. You say, well, they didn't have what he told me, but they may have another container that has spinosad in it, made by Bonide, or made by Greenlight, or made by one of the other companies. So if you know to look for the active ingredient, it's like if I say acetaminophen, most of you know, hey, that's Tylenol, but I might use generic acetaminophen. So it helps to kind of learn what the active ingredient names for these pesticides are, because it helps you when you do go find what you need. So spinosad is actually organic, and it's unlike a lot of organic insecticides, it is super effective on the pest targets. It was used, it still is used in row crops like cotton to control this cotton bollworm I mentioned, and it worked extremely well. It's made by fermenting a soil microbe that somebody found at the site of an old rum still down in Jamaica years ago, and they ferment that, and then they produce the spinosad. Now, some of the formulations of spinosad, if you go buy them, they won't say on the label it's organic, but that's not because of the spinosad. That's because of the inert ingredients that are in there. Greenlight makes one that is OMRI approved. That means it's organic. There's an organic materials review. So, you know, that's a good product for any caterpillar pest. It also works really well on potato beetles. Doesn't work on most beetles, but it works on Colorado potato beetle because the larvae feed on the leaves. And it's also good on thrips if you have to control thrips on the crop. Another pest I need to mention on tomatoes is stink bug. And of course, stink bug, in my view, is the #1 insect pest in the vegetable garden because it attacks most vegetables out there. It's really difficult to control. They have several, y'all familiar with stink bugs, little shield-shaped insects. Some are green, some are brown. The one that's brown we call the brown stink bug. The one that's green we call the green stink bug. That's their approved common name. There's one that only doesn't do well up north, but it does well down here in the south, so we call it the southern green stink bug. We separate it from the green stink bug. But all of them do the same type of damage. The control is pretty much the same. The problem with them is, for you guys that want to garden organically, I don't know what to tell you to do other than what I call hand picking and foot stomping. They just are no good organic controls for stink bugs. You can try to use natural pyrethrin, but if you really are gardening organically, you won't be using it with the PBO synergist, and it may knock them down, but they're probably going to get back up and walk away in an hour. You know, so there's just not a good organic control for that pest or any of the what I consider as an entomologist the bug pests. If we go walk around later, we'll probably see some leaf-footed bugs, the brown ones that have an odor. When they fly, they kind of sound like a wasp flying by. If you grow in sunflowers, you'll see them accumulate on those sunflowers. They'll attack tomatoes, sometimes squash. That's a bug also. They're really hard to kill with any of the organic products. There's just not anything that works on it. Organic caterpillar control, we got the spinosad, and that works great on any caterpillar. That's a whole lot better than the BTs. I quit recommending the BT. Y'all know what I mean by the BT products. There's organic gardeners are familiar with those. It's a product, Bacillus thuringiensis. It's a bacteria that produces a toxin. So you still end up using a toxin that is especially toxic to caterpillars. When they eat it, it dissolves in their gut and it kills them. It's basically, when we eat it, it doesn't dissolve in our guts. And so it's a very useful tool, but it only gave about 40 to 50% control, whereas the spinosad is like 95 to 100% control in the same test. So I quit recommending the BTs to caterpillars simply got the spinosad, even to organic growers. So the stink bugs, if you're not organic, and I'll tell you all this, the one insecticide, I don't spray a lot in my garden at home. I sprayed quite a bit yesterday because I had two things that needed attention at one time. I was spraying my tomatoes for this tomato fruit worm I mentioned, and I put this product in there. It's permethrin. So again, there's a lot of different formulations of permethrin. The bottle I have right now says high yield garden, pet, and livestock spray. It's 10% permethrin, and I believe it's a tablespoon to the gallon. I've got me a little cheat sheet that I keep stapled up on by my shed, so because I always forget these things. So when I make these notes, it helps me when I'm mixing up rather than. These days, I can't just read a label as easily as I used to. I have to get my glasses just to set this right.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
How does that affect bees and birds?
These products that we use in here are really quite safe. The mammalian toxicity of these pyrethroids and avian toxicity is super low. So that's not a big concern. Now bees, most any insecticide will affect bees if you spray it directly on them, or if you spray with permethrin in the morning and a honeybee comes within an hour or so, it may get a lethal dose of permethrin. It could be effective. So the way around that is to spray late in the day. I was spraying at 7:30 last night. So, did you have a question or just? shooting flies. Okay.
Yeah. Well, is that what the university uses to spray the weeds and the woods these days? Are they home?
No, probably they'd probably be using a herbicide. I honestly don't know what they'd be using. Yeah, but permethrin it's a really common insecticide, one of the most widely used garden insecticides, and the reason I keep it is it works on most garden insects, and it can be used on most vegetables that you grow in your garden. So that that's another thing to keep in mind about vegetables before you spray it. That particular vegetable, you read that label and find out, well, can I really use it on this vegetable? You can't use permethrin on okra. I don't think there's a good reason that you can't. It just isn't labeled. Sometimes there's a really good reason you can't. So when I say it's not labeled, I don't use it because I don't know what the reason is for leaving it off the label. But you can use it on most garden vegetables. But you read that label, can I use it on that vegetable? And then how many days do I have to wait between spraying it and picking it? And sometimes it says wait till the spray is dry, or sometimes it says 0 days pre-harvest interval, which means you could go out there and spray those tomatoes. I could have sprayed my tomatoes last night, and I could have picked the right one on my way into the house and peeled it and eaten it. That would have complied with that label, but I don't do that. I interpret 0 as well. I'm going to wait at least 24 hours, and I usually try to build in at least one more day, even though there are already a lot of safety nets built into these insecticide labels. But that's one of the more useful ones there. So that's really about the only insecticide I keep for using in my garden. The reason I was spraying last night then was for these tomato fruit worms. And I grow tomatillas, and they're really bad if they get in tomatillas. Those fruit worms really like tomatillas. And so I was spraying my tomatillas, my tomatoes, and my peppers. I ended up spraying all 3 of those because I've got a fungicide mix in there too. And then it was just the right time for me to spray my southern peas, my pink-eye purple hull peas, because the big pests there, and I don't see a lot of peas in y'all's plots, and of course the reason for that is it takes a pretty big area to get much benefit out of peas. I see some snap beans, and you can grow a lot more snap beans than a small one. But if you do grow southern peas, the big pest there is the cowpea curculio. Some of you may be familiar with it. When you shell your peas, and there's a little pimple on the pea, there's a little grub developing inside that. So my grandmother taught me you got to pick your peas twice. You pick them, you shell them, and you pick through them again to get all those little pimple peas out of there. Otherwise, you'll be eating either the eggs or those tiny little grubs that are developing inside that pea. So these things will come to your pea patch. The adults will, when there's adults, and they will accumulate into peas, but they only can lay eggs in the developing peas. So as long as there's no blooms there, no little peas, you don't worry about them. And then as soon as I see the first little peas that long, I spray once, I spray 5 days later, and I spray 5 days later. Hopefully I've managed to meet that schedule. And when I do, my wife's really happy because the peas, there's not many of those pimple peas. They're real easy to pick over them.
Are the insects poisonous for you to eat?
No, they're not harmful for you to eat.
Well, there's a lot of protein in it.
There is protein there. And I'm sure I've eaten more than my share of cowpea curculio larvae over my life.
Indians used to eat a lot of insects.
I'm trying to think. Cowpea, it's an odd word. You could say weevil. It's a little weevil. Curculio. Curculio. If you grow plums or peaches in your backyard, the thing that chews the holes in them and the little worm inside, that's a plum curculio. It's a different insect, but it's similar. C-U-R-C-U-L-I-O.
That's exactly how I spelled
it. You did well.
What's a guess?
It's on page 6, by the way.
Thank you.
So I'm trying to think what other insects I should mention here before I...
How about the ones that love cabbage?
The ones that love cabbage. Okay, that's mostly going to be what I call, and I still call them this, I call them the cold crop caterpillar. So there's a group of them. There's cross-striped cabbage worm, there's cabbage looper, there's the big one worldwide is diamondback moth. Now in Mississippi, it's not as big a deal. Worldwide, it's the #1 pest, and it's the little caterpillar, when it's mature, is only about a ½ inch long, but it chews a lot of holes and a lot of brassica leaves. Now cold crops, does anybody recognize that term? Anybody?
Cold crop?
Cold crops. See, that's a kind of an archaic term. And it used to be, brassica, if I say the brassica?
Yeah.
So that's like cabbage and cauliflower and Brussels sprouts and broccoli and bok choy and all those groups, turnips and mustard are even in that group. Those are, to old guys like me, those are cold crops. And it was even kind of getting to be a fading out term when I was a student, but they taught it to me, so it stuck with me. Most people today call them the brassicas, and that's how EPA and FDA, when they're setting these pesticide tolerances, they'll group those together. You know, once it gets a label for the brassica, then it usually can be used on any brassica. So, you know, mostly it's the caterpillar pests that bother your cabbage, and this spinosad product that I mentioned, it works really well on any of those if you need to spray for them.
Well, I have some of those that also looks like they're called harlequin.
Harlequin bugs?
Harlequin bugs, okay. Are you still growing some now, this time of year?
There's a couple in the garden still.
Okay, yeah, okay. So, you know, that's one of the things that happens is the time of the year that you grow something. That's another one of those cultural controls I could mention is that, you know, one of my philosophies in my garden is this, I try to make this work. As soon as I'm done with it, I pull it up. Like, I've had 2 plantings of sweet corn already, and I've got root knot nematodes in my garden. So one of the things I do now, I've just learned, I've got them in the last couple of years. That corn, we picked the roasting ears that morning, and I had those plants pulled up that afternoon. So I'll probably put Mississippi pink eye peas back there. That's my plan because they're root knot nematode resistant. So that's another, you know, that's another non-insecticide management tool, and it actually will reduce the number for this fall. So I'll have better luck next year.
So what do they attack? The nematodes?
The root knot nematodes attack a lot of different plants. They're not an insect. They're a tiny little worm. They bore into the roots of plants, and they're bad on tomatoes. They're bad on okra. They're bad on a lot of squash, watermelons. And they don't kill the plant, they just make it be not productive. The roots are clubbed, it'll look like it's droughty, they really are bad once they build up, and there's no good control for home gardening really, other than these cultural things. Tomatoes, a lot of tomatoes have root knot nematode resistance, so I always make sure now, except for these sun goals that I like to grow, and I can tell this year the nematodes are on and they're not doing as well. But I always make sure my tomatoes are nematode resistant. That's not an insect. But actually, nematodes kind of get lost. The plant pathologists aren't sure they want to claim them. The entomologists say, well, no, they don't have 6 legs. They don't belong to us. But, excuse me. A lot of entomology departments around the country, it's entomology and nematology. So they end up getting stuck in with entomology. Yes, ma'am.
These plants that are resistant, this,
Oh,
that,
thank
and
you so
the
much.
other.
They have.
The plants that are resistant, this, that, and the other.
Uh-huh.
Okay, are they in the group that Monsanto has proliferated or
No, these are not necessarily transgenic. None of these that I'm mentioning are transgenic plants. They're just selected because they have a resistant trait. They're natural, yeah, it's natural resistance. Sometimes it's just one single gene, and my plant pathology peers tell me that there's only one gene for tomato spotted wilt virus resistance, and when it fails, all these resistant varieties are not going to work anymore. But that hasn't happened yet, so maybe it won't fail. You know, we hope for that. So I may have reached the point where I don't know what to talk about next unless y'all ask me something.
I have a question.
Sure.
You mentioned that mulch, that reflective mulch. Would that work in the squash borer?
It does not work on squash borer,
man.
squash vine borer. So that's, yeah, that's another really important pest. And that's the one that
I
what
battled
she's
that.
referring to. The squash looks fine, the pumpkin looks fine that morning, and you come back that afternoon and it's wilted and died.
So what all does it work on?
It only works on the thrips, really, and it'll help on aphids, but I honestly don't consider aphids to be a huge pest in the garden. If you just kind of ignore them, there's a little parasitic wasp that'll come in, and most species, it'll start laying its eggs in them, and you'll see the aphids kind of swell up and turn brown or tan colored, and I see them just a lot of times just take those out totally.
Did you talk about bugs not to kill? Yeah.
Bugs not to kill, okay.
Good bugs that you should not kill.
One of the ways you can use, one of the best ways to distinguish between the beneficials and the non-beneficials is that if it's really numerous, it's probably a pest.
Okay.
The beneficials usually aren't. There's more rabbits than foxes, so
Okay.
that's kind of the idea of that. The other part of that, though, is that a lot of the beneficials are so small. I mean, it's hard for me to find.
Okay.
You know, you just got to really know what you're looking for and be really lucky.
But
so
like
I probably,
ladybugs are beneficial.
so
right?
ladybugs
Okay.
are beneficial. They're spotted, and usually if you see one that's spotted with red or orange coloration, it's going to be a lady beetle. If it's spotted with yellow, it's got black spots with yellow, that's a cucumber beetle. If it's got stripes, it may well be a cucumber beetle. So as far as the beetles, if it's a little beetle with spots or yellow or orange coloration, it's probably not a pest in our Mississippi garden.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's, and there's a bunch of beneficials out there, and that's, to me, that's really important. And the reason my dad got by all those years without spraying much was because he didn't spray much. And you know, as soon as you spray,
Yeah.
you've killed these beneficials that are so small you don't even realize they're there, and then you run the risk of the pest just increasing with nothing to keep them in check. And that's a basic principle in entomology that we see happen all the time. Sometimes in row crops we make it happen on purpose so we can get some insects to do insecticide trials. You know, so.
Well, I'd love for you just to look at mine.
Okay, be glad to.
There's holes
Now-
and stuff.
And a few holes, you know, I'll be honest, I took a pretty good walk out there and I didn't see any major insect problems. Now, on the tomatoes, I'm sure there's some fruit worms possibly laying eggs. That still would be a concern. And the bug pests, that would be to me, that's the main things y'all don't be concerned about. Before I forget, let me mention this about beneficials. I think it's really helpful to try to conserve the naturally occurring stuff we have, but I don't think it helps a bit to get in the catalog and order lady beetles or order prey and manage or order anything that they've got for sale, because when you release it, prey and manage, they might eat your honeybees, but they're not going to eat the pests.
Yeah.
Lady beetles, if you release them, they're probably going to fly, you know, over that ditch right there and be gone, be over there in the parking lot of the shopping mall or whatever.
We did
So-
have an infestation of ladybugs at one time.
Oh yeah, we've got this Asian lady beetle, which is a good beneficial in the summer, but
And they
in
got
the winter.
they're in your house.
Yeah, they can.
Is there a list of the beneficial bugs?
Is there a list? It would be a long list, and I don't know that I have one in here. You know, I don't have one in here, no, so I don't know of one right off the top of my head to refer you to. But there's a bunch, and like I say, a lot of them, I mean, squash bugs. A lot of you grow squash. You know what squash bug eggs look like?
Yeah.
On the top of your squash leaf, you'll see a loose cluster of little brown eggs that look like kind of like little footballs. That's the eggs of the squash bug. If you look down at the base of the plant, you may see the brown adults, or you may see the ash gray nymphs feeding down at the base of the plant. And they can cause a squash to just wilt and die overnight also. But the reason I mention them is there are little wasps. If you look at some of those egg masses, sometimes you'll see little wasps hanging around. They're laying their eggs in the squash bug eggs. They're a parasite. So the list for beneficial really would be huge because there are so many of these small ones. I mean, some of them hadn't even been really identified yet.
Probably could Google them.
Right? Yeah. There are a bunch. There are a bunch out there. Yes, sir.
I'm sorry, I showed up late, but did you talk about slugs at all?
I didn't talk about slugs.
I mean, that's the biggest problem I'm having. I don't have a plot here, but
Okay.
you know, I live in Memphis, and it just seems like the slugs come out at night, and then in the morning, like, you know, half my peppers are gone.
Yeah,
And-
on peppers even. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I mean, I've had so little luck with peppers because of the slugs. And what people have told me, and maybe this is all you can offer either, is, you know, just put out beer. But, you know, I bought the cheapest beer, and it still costs me a lot of money to put out beer every night.
Okay.
So that it kills the slugs. You know, I'd rather drink it.
Okay. I was saying, maybe somebody's following you along the other end of the beer and figure out how you're putting it out.
Well, no, every morning there are, I mean, the cup of
It
beer.
does work, yeah.
You know, there's slugs in there. You know,
Wow.
I don't know if I'm doing
Yeah, they work.
aggregate damage, like damage to the population.
So just joking, one reason I didn't talk about slugs is they're not insects. But
Right.
but-
Yeah, I figured. Yeah.
But no, I do deal with slugs.
Yeah,
And
oh, okay.
to me, the best way, because they're a problem in my garden, especially around my raised beds of lettuce. And that's no fun. You know, when I get the lettuce inside and I find a slug, I wash it off real fast before my girls see it. You know?
Yeah.
So you don't want them there,
Yeah.
for sure. And the best treatment I found, there are some slug baits.
Yeah.
And there's two kinds. There's one that's got metaldehyde. And that one, if you read the label, it'll say do not use around pets or children. So it's the toxic.
Got both of those.
It's not the organic. There are others that have iron phosphate as the active ingredient.
I've had
used
good
both
luck
of them.
with the iron phosphate.
Yeah,
We
okay.
have
Both
slugs
work.
in our yard too.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And the trick about slugs is you got to think about them way ahead of time. So like I have people with strawberries, you know, they have well, there's some strawberries out there. And they can be a problem in strawberries around my lettuce bed. If I don't think about it until I'm starting to harvest the lettuce and see the slugs, I'm too late. They're already eating the lettuce. I'm not going to get them to come off of that and come eat my bait. So I put the bait out a lot of times when the bed is bare.
Okay.
You know, I put it out in the early spring, or well, not with lettuce. But in lettuce, I'll put it out after I've cleaned out my lettuce bed in the late spring, and while I'm still getting some rain, or I'll water, and I'll put the bait out around the bed, and that makes the slugs move around. So baiting after a rain or after your sprinkler comes on or that type of thing.
So
Now, if it comes on too much, it's going to mess up your bait. So it's
Right.
best to get the water. You can have it be drying up a bit,
Mm-hmm.
like at night, the ideal time, and then put your bait out. And it can work really well. You just have to be persistent with it.
So the bait causes, I mean, they take the bait back and it you know, it kills more slugs than eat it, kind of
In this
thing,
case,
or-
I don't think it works like that. Some of the
Okay.
insecticides, like some of the cockroach baits, do work like that.
Yeah.
I think in this case it has to be slug by slug. But
Okay.
like you say, they're out there having a party at night.
Yeah, yeah.
And so if you got that bait laying on the ground and it's moist, they walk up and they.
I've never seen slugs this big, I gotta say. They're like
Okay, it sounds like you got a bad problem. You probably don't grow hosta either, maybe.
I know.
They love
People that
hosta.
love hops.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
It's
Okay.
funny, maybe.
Yeah.
So that
I don't
that
think
does work.
they eat these kind of, I mean, they eat the banana slugs, right?
I don't know what
That's
kind
what
of slugs
I
they
heard
are.
people eat those, but these I
The
think
big
have,
yellow ones, right?
yeah, yeah. I mean, these are these like really fat, spotted slugs. They're really gross.
I've
looking.
seen
They're
who have
disgusting.
those. I think they're called leopard slugs. Does that
Okay.
sound right?
It does sound right. I'm
Enormous.
not that up on slug ideas.
Enormous
Yeah.
Yeah.
critters.
But that's the best treatment I found, and when I remember to do it far enough ahead of time, it does work quite well.
Okay, I'll remember that for next year.
I mean, there's nothing to say that you can't go ahead and use it now. But
You know-
now the other thing is, the more harborage they have, where they can get out of the sunlight in the daytime, the happier they are. So, you know, I've seen people that had raised beds made of hollow cinder blocks and bricks with holes in them. I mean, you just got a slug castle, you know.
Yeah.
So, you know, the kind of beds y'all have right there with just the 2x material,
Yeah.
that's like minimal opportunity for them to hide, and the less mulch you have and
Right.
things like that. Mulch is a two-edged thing. It harbors some pests, but it sure is good for weed control and
Right.
things like that. So, you know, I don't know what your situation is, but it may be that if you look around, you say, well, maybe I can clean this up and this up and this up around before I'm growing peppers,
Right.
and that may help too.
I may just not grow peppers.
Well,
They're such a
it sounds like you like peppers, though.
They're kind of cool to
Yeah.
get the results, but so many problems.
I have made an observation, and I want your opinion on this. So I've been trying to sort out good bugs and bad bugs too, Sunny, and I feel like the bad bugs try to hide from you when you spot them. Like squash bugs, like these different beetles, when you see them, they scurry and they try to hide. And a ladybug doesn't really do that. You know what I mean? A wasp doesn't try to hide from you. Praying mantis isn't going to necessarily hide from you. But these other bugs, it's like they know they're up to no good. And they know you're going to get them. And the caterpillars aren't quite like that, which have just been swarming some of my whole crops. But anyway, have you ever noticed that? Or is that just
I think you just taught me something.
anthropomorphizing
No, I
something
think
here?
you're right, but I never noticed that. I never thought
Okay.
about it. But as soon as you mentioned that, you know, there's a lot of truth to that. A lot of the bigger predators that we see, they're not as afraid of things. They
Right.
really aren't. But you're right. The mobile pests, like caterpillars, like you said, or aphids.
Yeah.
Aphids,
Right.
you know, they got their mouth part stuck in a leaf. They can't
Sure.
leave that fast. So, yeah. I think you're on to
It's
something.
strange.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Uh,
It increases the anxiety I feel when I see them if they're running and hiding. It just very frustrating. But
Now the vine board, before I forget, I want to go back to this squash vine board because I see a lot of squash plants out there. And that is a big pest for squash. And so the things you can do in one of these non-insecticide cultural practices, the earlier you can plant, and that's often my main strategy, plant the squash as early as I can get it out there, plant more, a vine or two more than I think I'll really need. Like I planted 3 or 4 this year and I lost one and we still got plenty of squash. So, and just let them go as long as they will till the vine borers kill them. So that's one strategy that works pretty well, because if you plant early, you're going to get less than if you plant later in the year, because they have several generations. That's true for most vegetables. A lot of these pests have multiple generations and they build up, and so by the fall, if you're trying to garden in the fall, you're dealing with huge numbers of pests like stick. So that's one thing. The spinosad product that we mentioned, if you're gardening organically, that would be what you'd want to use to spray for the vine borer. Now, the adult of that is a moth that flies around in the daytime. Are any of you familiar with what it looks like?
I think I've seen it.
Yeah, you'd think it was a red wasp
Yeah.
flying around when it flies by. It buzzes like a red wasp, same time of day,
So what that is.
and it'll go lay its eggs out on the leaves at the tip of the vine. So the eggs hatch and the little larvae works its way down the plant.
Oh,
And
it
so-
doesn't, it doesn't lay them in the bottom.
It doesn't lay them in the
Where,
bottom.
lays them at the, can you see the egg?
It's really hard to see the eggs. I've actually watched them lay their eggs and then had trouble finding them.
Okay.
So, you know, I mean, I found them because that's how I knew that that's what they were doing. But, so finding the eggs is not going to be a good strategy in this case, but spraying will work, and you've got to have the spray out there before that egg hatches, because as soon as that little larva hatches, he's going to crawl down that leaf, get to the stem of the leaf, petiole, chew in there, and of course that's hollow, and he's in the vine, and they work their way down the vine. And they're growing, and the way caterpillars work is that, you know, it takes them maybe 14 days to develop to adults. This one may take about 20, I think. By the time they get to the base of the plant, they're teenagers. And so they're hungry, and they eat a lot in that last day of their life. And that's all caterpillars do that. The last 2 days of their life, they eat 90% of what they're going to eat. And so that's why all of a sudden that plant wilts, because its vascular system is for that, at least that one vine.
Do they make cocoons?
Then they leave, they bore out, and they form a cocoon in the soil. But I run into people all the time that think, hey, that's something crawling in from the soil and boring into my vine, when actually it's going from the other end. I mention that because if you're going to spray with a spinosad or the permethrin will work also, you got to spray out on the tips of the vine, not the base of the vine. You got to spray the base of the vine to control the squash bugs that are there. And the spinosad won't work on that.
Tour.
yeah, so we're planning on a tour of the garden to kind of point out some of these things, even
Okay.
damage on leaves. I do have one quick question. Diatomaceous earth, is that helpful for, let's say, squash bugs, for example, that like to be around the base of the squash plant, you know, they go down and up and down and up. Just sprinkling around the base, would that help? I know you don't hear much about using it,
Yeah.
and it's not a chemical. So, it can have a chemical in it, but, you know, on its own, it's just basically glass, isn't
Right.
it?
Yeah. So she's asking about diatomaceous earth, which are the skeletons of some little tiny sea creatures. I don't actually know what
Diatoms.
diatoms.
Yeah.
I don't know how they fit in the scheme of life, but they were alive at one time. And their skeletons are abrasive to insects. So the way this works is that when insects have a waxy coating that keeps them from drying out. When that abrades their skeleton, they dry out and they die. It works really well for household pests like cockroaches, ants in a wall void, places where that stuff's going to stay dry. I have not really worked with it much in outdoor settings because that's going to continually get re-wetted. I can see how it might be somewhat useful on the squash bug situation you mentioned. It certainly could. I don't think it would work on many caterpillar pests because it's going to get washed off the leaf pretty bad.
My daughter uses it for her horses.
Okay, to feed them? Or
I don't know how she
okay.
uses it.
Yeah. Well, there's actually a food grade
Yeah,
diatomaceous
that's what
earth.
she
I
uses.
know I've eaten it because my
Yeah.
wife puts it in her stored rice and beans that she keeps for sometimes
I
years.
use it and I've used it for my cat, but it has to be wet so she doesn't breathe it in because it affects the breathing pattern.
Yeah, you don't want to get it in your lungs. You'll have silicosis. Yeah, it can cause silicosis. So we're gonna go look at the garden now.
Yeah.
Sure. Anyway, y'all just feel free to ask me what y'all have on your mind out there. I think maybe the best way is to have somebody lead us to the plot they will ask a question.
Did Sunny want Sunny?
Well, good morning. Did you leave any blueberries anywhere near the bush?
Sunny.
Sunny says
Did you have a question?
I did, yes.
Are we looking for a place
Should we
to
go
start?
to number
I
5?
think we're looking for a place.
Okay. So, I think I figured out what I did wrong with this was I planted it too late.
Yeah, that's the main.
Because this is, I think it's those,
Kale or?
this is kale, yeah.
Yeah,
It's
okay.
those little, those.
Did he run off?
There's one right there.
Oh, okay, harlequin bugs.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I've been squashing them.
They ate up
Look at
my,
it fly off.
I've been
That was
squashing
what you were
them.
asking about. Was a
yeah,
harlequin.
And
they
that's-
ate up my,
Squashing them by hand has been working pretty well, actually. But this is more holy than it was even just yesterday.
Well, now, okay, the harlequin bugs are not chewing the holes in the leaves. That
Oh,
would be
God.
probably a caterpillar pest. What the harlequin bugs would be doing? You might be picking a leaf.
Oh, go for it.
have enough of them.
Yeah.
They have piercing sucking mouth parts, so they can't chew a hole in the leaf. But those little white areas on the leaf there, that's where they've been feeding.
Okay.
So, yeah, so the holes in the leaves would be from caterpillars.
I haven't even
So did you
seen
find
any
a harlequin
of
bug?
those.
There was one, he
Yeah,
was flying.
just
Oh,
flew
okay.
away, yeah.
Because I've got some on my horseradish over there. So.
There's one right
No,
here.
It used to be the only place I
Right
could
there.
ever find
Oh,
it
yeah.
was go to
And
the
look at these.
You
look
know
at
the
these.
thing.
Look
Yeah.
at
Well,
these.
horseradish is
Look,
is
these
so
caterpillars right here.
toxic.
Oh
really,
yeah.
on
Oh
its
yeah,
own.
that must be his
Do they hide
caterpillars,
out there
yeah.
because there aren't any predators
Yeah.
there?
that's one of those.
They're the caterpillars.
Oh yeah, here's some. Yeah, that's a good find there. That's the cross-striped caterpillar.
There's a harlequin bug
The
right
cross-striped
there.
cabbage worm. Yeah, I was gonna say there's a cabbage worm.
There's a harlequin bug.
Show her the caterpillars.
I didn't see the
Mama, that's so
There's a harlequin bug.
morning.
You want to hold that?
Oh,
It might make your hands stink a little
I've never
bit.
even
Is that okay?
that.
You're not afraid?
There
So there's the caterpillars there. The one called a. You see how imaginative entomologists are when we name things and it's got stripes going across the back, so that's a cross-striped cabbage worm. And I usually only see those in the warmer months. I don't usually see them like on fall, cold crops
Okay, so
going
that's-
into the winter.
Kale's cold crop.
Yeah, right, yeah. So it's a challenge to grow at this time of the year. You know,
Okay.
once you get much past
Well, I was just
April.
about to pull it out, and then all of a sudden it grew giant. So I just
Re-encourage
left-
it, yeah, right. Yeah.
And I've been squeezing those harlequin beetles, but it sounds like I need to get the slugs off and smush them too.
They're hard to find.
Right, yeah, the slugs, you could use the iron phosphate.
I see a
bait to
caterpillar
eventually-
right there. I have
See another one?
Look
Okay.
at this.
I have those.
Here's
Oh, okay.
another one.
That's one of those cross-striped
Yeah.
caterpillars. So this is what's chewing the holes in the leaf.
I feed those to my chickens.
Okay. Did you get a good look at it?
One
Yeah.
for a chicken.
Oh, they're kind of
You got some
pretty.
chickens in
They're
the backyard?
And we toss
Not
them to
pretty,
yellow.
Sonny.
Be gentle.
What you need to do is
There's another one right there.
Caterpillar.
Yeah.
So, to answer your question, Sonny, if you were going to control them, the harlequin bugs, you just about have to spray with either permethrin or bifenthrin.
Okay, and that's what's causing the little white spots.
The white spots, yeah. And I rarely, I've never seen them in my garden, to be honest.
Okay.
Now, there may be a reason.
We'll share.
Yes.
Yeah, and you had them on horseradish?
Yeah.
Educate me about horseradish. Is it grown more than,
Oh,
is
it's
it grown
huge.
across the season?
Oh, it's all over the place now.
But I mean, how long do you grow it?
Oh, you can harvest the roots
perennial?
whenever. Yeah, it's perennial.
Okay, so that's
Yeah.
probably why I see it on horseradish, because they're taking it through the summer
Yeah.
rather than terminating it. Yeah. Because I know when I go to, if y'all have ever been to Crystal Springs, any of y'all been to the truck crops field day there, or the fall flower?
Yeah.
That's, if y'all like to garden, that's really worth y'all going to. They have a huge fall vegetable garden. So they're starting to gear up now and planting vegetables, so it's usually in October. And it's like a 2-day deal, a Friday and Saturday, and you can come see. You can see all the things you can grow in the garden in the fall. It's down at Crystal Springs. And people come from all over the state. And so they'll have horseradish there, and that's used to be where I had to go to find my
So it distributes water to the cucumber.
Got some here.
Yeah.
So the only treatment I would know if they were a problem would be permethrin by
We had the
not an
hardest time.
organic treatment. And that was
Asher,
a caterpillar.
and we had the hardest time growing this cucumber ever. Okay. So
Other than hand picking and foot stomping, and I mean, I use that a lot. I used to tell my kids, I've got a lot that are that age, I would pay them a penny a piece to pick Colorado
My
potato beetle
advisor
larvae
in
off
school
and dime for
would
the
pay
adults.
his kids to pick bugs off.
And that worked quite well at the right time of the year.
I'm going to go out there like a mad
And
scientist
what
you know,
about these
just,
cucumbers
it's
here?
a
These
huge
dried
thing. You
crunchy
Okay.
leaves.
stop her out.
Because I struggle with that too.
So that's going to be a disease. And when I get into diseases, I'm not that good at it.
Okay.
what about real
My
quick?
plant,
Are these the same slug doing holes over
you know, that's probably when you see holes in legume leaves, no matter beans or peas or whatever, it's most likely the bean leaf beetle. It's an adult bean leaf beetle. They're hard to identify because they're multicolored.
I've never seen one over here.
Do they eat roses too? Is that a
No,
Japanese beetle?
that's a Japanese beetle maybe. Bean leaf beetle, let me see if we see some. We should find some.
I have not been able to find one.
I actually did my master's work on the bean leaf beetle in soybeans. And oftentimes they're going to drop off. That is it. That is one right
Of course he shows up when you
there. So that's a bean leaf beetle. And that's kind of the classic color form, but they can vary in color from pink to orange to salmon colored. There are red ones. There are red ones with that black spot, so they have a lot of varied colors. And they may have to make me backtrack on my rule about if you see something red in the garden, well, it could be a female bean leaf beetle. But, yeah, these are really common. Holes of that degree, they're not going to hurt the plant at all.
Okay,
Yeah.
so I can just sort of leave these.
Yeah, you can leave that. In soybeans, what we found out was a soybean plant could stand up to 35% defoliation and not suffer any loss.
Here's a gift.
Okay. Oh, mating harlequin bug. Now we'll point out this guy right here. Let's don't catch him because he'll bite. That's one of the benefits.
Oh, okay.
What is it?
This is an assassin bug.
It's pretty.
That's an assassin.
Yeah, so
When it
we'll
opens
see it.
up.
Right here.
Did everybody see the bean leaf beetle that wanted to see it?
Good beetle.
That big one?
Assassin bug, aptly named assassin.
Yeah, but he bites.
But often the beans, like you said, will grow so fast.
Let me see the beetle.
Right. Bean leaf beetle it's not a big deal usually
Here's one.
on legumes. I mean, it can be if you get a bunch of them on small legumes.
What is
And
this?
they will actually, that's a hoverfly, so that's another beneficial. The adult doesn't do any good, but it lays an egg that hatches into a maggot that feeds on aphids.
Okay.
And so you'll see the kind of a little brown maggot-shaped critter crawling around eating your aphids. Anybody else need to see the
I
harlequin
didn't
bug?
see it.
Are you
Oh,
talking
that's two. They're mating.
Right, yeah.
There's going to be more soon.
Yeah.
So if anybody, I'm going to give this to somebody that wants to do the hand-picking, foot-stomping approach.
Want me to?
You can do the honor.
And I had fire ants over here, but I just drowned them. So
Thank you, Roger.
I haven't seen them.
You're welcome in my plot.
So we should mention fire ants around this whole area.
Yeah.
The treatments that I would suggest to y'all, there are two ways you could go. There's an organic treatment called, well, it's a green light fire ant bait. The active ingredient is spinosyn. And it will work on fire. You could spread it over this whole garden. And if it gets over into vegetables, it's not an issue. The other option would be something called Extinguish. Now don't get the Extinguish Plus. There's one called Extinguish. It's got methoprene in it. And it's not organic, but methoprene has an exemption from tolerance by FDA, meaning they don't care how much is in our food because they say it's not that harmful. So,
We trust the FDA.
so if it's used for, you'd still want to you still want to put it out just in the areas here. The bait works really well to keep the fire ants out of the whole area. So that's something I would make a granular bait, and you could make that kind of a program that y'all did, applying it about 3 times a year,
drowning.
get into the container and just come along and sprinkle it in the alleyway. And the fire ant workers are going to gather it up, they're going to carry it to the colony. It's not going to contaminate anybody's plot, whether you're using spinosad or
I guess I can run away with my friends.
My son
Okay. Really
Orlando
helpful.
uses aspartame.
I can come and join you around
I've
my
heard
work.
that. It's
good news for
that, but I haven't tried it.
I've tried that cornmeal.
Extinguish or
Is yours?
green light fire ant bait that has spinosad.
Got some good looking
It doesn't work as well. Now the extinguish, I'll tell you all this, you'll think it's not working. It takes 2 months because the way it works is it just makes the queen start laying sterile eggs. So the colony, if you got a big mound, it's going to be there a long time.
Put the bottles in there, like crack slugs or something.
If you got big mounds that you got to kill right away, let's say
have continuous water for that cucumber, and it
you can
worked
get that liquid
because
spinosad.
I've tried
that you fertilize
4
the
times
bottom.
to
It'll tell
do
you how to
cucumber
mix it
seed
up with
in
a
the
bridge.
plant. So do I
It's about 2
pick
gallons
one
for a
of
really
those?
big mound. Soak
Yeah.
it down.
Okay, I just
You
select
can either
one
pick
of-
it off and put it like there, or just toss it out and put another seed if you want.
Oh, I should move
But you
it.
can move it, yeah.
Now, how
I mean,
about
I
guys
generally
mix
just
this
plant
earth
stuff real thick and
Would it
toss
just
them that
get
way.
damp too
But
often? To
if you want, you can always
do the
pull it
trick?
out.
I don't think it works that
Okay.
well on the fire.
And then are the starting?
You know, to me, you can tell I think it's an indoor.
You make it more in the fall. What's
More, more than it is sold for fire ant control, and it can work if you stir it. Usually, you don't stir up an ant mound when you
Right, these are going to be real productive next spring, and these aren't going to be as productive.
It'll kill the ones that you get contact. It just doesn't
Do you
do a
think
lot
there's
of them.
peppers in there?
You know, if you were persistent with it, I'm sure you can kill them all that.
Why do substances like Perrier or grits actually appear to eradicate fire ant mound?
Okay, she's asking about a lot of the quote home remedies. I call them off the wall remedies for fire ants. My peer in Texas years ago, that's all he worked with was fire ants, and so he said, "There's so many of these, I'm going to do tests." And he tested tons of them, and he never found any that worked. Of those. Now, some of the organic things like citrus, there's a citronella-based fire ant treatment that does work. You can kill them with insecticidal soap. I've killed them with just hot water.
Yeah,
Drenching a
I've
fire
tried
ant mound
that.
into spring. It
Boiling.
takes the right time of the year, and you got to use a lot of water to really soak it in there. But I have made that work. There's been studies actually done where they got about 60%. They could kill 60% of the mounds with one treatment. Not,
No, I'm
yeah, they do.
So
But the baits that I mentioned, if you use those baits 3 times a year,
Oh, so should I check it?
I'm talking about the one called
I haven't seen it.
Green Light makes one with spinosad. Not as effective
So
as
they make a treatment as well as a bait?
they do. Yeah, it's still spinosad, but they got it formulated a different
You
way.
can also
So it's in a granular bait
like
that fire ants
winter and in your second season.
but there's one called Extinguish that works even better.
One of the best.
It just takes a long time to work, but if you're persistent and proactive.
You only need one for flowers.
Okay.
Pick
What
one and
about
see
like
if
at
it's
the
been
base
good.
of the tomatoes,
I mean, it might
how
be eaten by
the
this
bottom
point, it's,
leaves
like,
start to
already
brown
gonna be
like that?
hard and not
Is
very
that from aphids,
greatly
or
edible.
Okay.
is that
Couldn't
just
cook it
old
down.
leaves,
Yeah,
or too shady, or?
So she's asking about this browning of the leaves. Before they brown, they probably turn yellow.
Yeah, right.
And that's probably early blight, which is another disease. So when I spray my tomatoes with my permethrin, I'm also mixing some fungicides and chlorthalonil in there to control that. So that's a fungal disease. And some years it's worse than others. One thing you can do to minimize it, I'm out of my area, except I grow a lot of tomatoes. Don't, when you water, I mean I water with a drip line that's embedded under my plastic so I don't get wet. So if you're out here watering by hand, you wouldn't want to be hosing down the whole tomato. You want to water down low. Or if you're going to hose down the whole plant, do it early in the morning and not this time of the day.
I have a question. You might have already covered this, but you see how the leaves are all shriveled up over there in that tomato? What causes that?
It's probably not something I know the answer to, but I'm going to go look.
Also, there's some little bitty
Right here?
bugs.
We got some. Okay, we got 2 things. We'll come back and look at that. You know, this is tomato leaves curl. And I've even asked our horticulturists why they do that, and they give me some cockamamie story about nutrient problems or excess nitrogen. I mean, it's just something that happens with tomato leaves. Now, sometimes it could be a virus. But in this case, I don't think it is. One thing I do notice.
What about all these white bugs?
Right. One thing I do notice on these.
Yeah, those white little bugs.
Yeah. Let's see what these are. The white. Well, we got two things going on here. I need to take a closer look, obviously. So one thing that's going on here is I noticed it on some tomatoes over here too, is y'all have a building population of spider mites. So these are tiny, tiny little things living on the bottom of the leaf. That's why I use this hand lens, because they're that tiny. So you know, people with good eyes can see something about the size of a period. And the thing you most often notice, see how that leaf looks stippled right there? So that's where the spider mites have fed on the bottom of the leaf, and they're killing individual cells, and it's showing up as that stippling effect.
How do you get rid of them?
Spider mites are hard to control, especially in a home garden. In commercial stuff, we've got really good miticides that work great, but there's none of those labeled for home vegetable gardens. So what I try to do in my garden is just try to avoid having a mite problem. I only spray what I know I got to spray, but I got to spray my tomatoes. And usually I get by, I mean, you may have them build up to a certain level and you can ignore them and they'll go away. Sometimes that happens. Sometimes they get bad, and in that case the only option you really have is either to spray with insecticidal soap, making sure you get good coverage of the underside of the leaf, or with neem oil. Neem oil is another organic treatment. Again, making sure you get good coverage of the underside of the leaf.
Question is, can you spray neem oil this time of year?
Well, that's why I don't like to use it. It'll make your plants be oily because it's an oil, and it can cause burns. So can insecticidal soap. So, you know, those are organic treatments, but I don't like to use them because of the plant damage I get.
Alberta spruce topiaries that get spider mites, you know, and I try to do the neem oil in the fall.
Oh yeah, but now spruce is a lot more sensitive to oil sprays than vegetables. But mostly on the vegetables, they'll just look bad.
I'm bad with spider mites.
Yeah, right, you are.
Spider mite crusade here. So anything.
The other thing that's on these plants is, if you look, you'll see some shed skins of aphids. And what's happened with this aphid population, and it may be, you asked me about the leaves curling. Aphids will make leaves curl, usually they curl downward. And it could have been that this had a fairly heavy infestation of aphids at one time, and that made the leaves curl. But it's died out due to that natural control we mentioned. There's actually one aphid still left here.
Where?
That's parasitized, that one right there, right in front of my thumb. So that's not a live aphid anymore, it's been killed by that little parasite.
Okay.
So I mean, I do see a lot of spider mites, and you know, my advice there would be kind of take a wait and see approach. I mean, this may be the last cluster this tomato is going to make, so it may go ahead and ripen before the spider mites become an issue anyway. A lot of times I think of it as a race. Commercial growers do it. You know, they think, well, a lot of commercial growers, they would take it out when they pick this cluster. The plant would be gone. They don't wait for the very last. They'll replant something else.
What about a sharp spray with the water hose? I mean, just drowning them, like every 2 or 3 days, just spraying it down. Or is that going to cause?
Well, she's asking about using a forceful water spray to control pests, and that can work. Aphids, when these aphids were on this terminal, you saw that, you could have hosed them down and knocked a lot off. That's all you're doing, and that does help. And when the beneficials show up, there's that many fewer that they have to control. And there's nothing that doesn't hurt them.
Right.
With spider mites, you can help spider mite control by misting the plants to get them good and wet. And what you're trying to do there is trigger a disease outbreak in the spider mites. There's a fungal disease that will show up and it'll just wipe them out. But my plant pathology buddies will say, yeah, but guess what else is going to happen when you miss those plants? So, you know, sometimes you decide, hey, I've got to do it. But, you know, it's kind of a last resort treatment. But it can work. It can help.
So, I just want to make sure everybody knows that the food is starting to be eaten, don't miss out. But I also just love hearing about bugs, so you know.
Y'all got to tell me what the schedule is, and I'll be compliant.
Are you hungry?
I'm hungry.
Well, there.
I got one question. I noticed almost like an ant in my tomatoes. It's like a cluster of these ant-looking insects. I've never seen them before in my garden.
There's some right here.
But they were covering the cherry tomato. They like hang out in the cluster.
Where are they?
And they look like.
Yeah, let's look at these and see if this is what you said.
This right here.
Do you have them?
Yeah.
On your.
Maybe this is.
Like these guys?
They're bigger than that.
Do they look like that?
No, they're big.
Let's see what
they
you
look
got
like
there.
a big fire ant or something.
Okay. Okay, so these are immatures of, I think it's going to be the leaf-footed bug, which is one of the bug pests. And you would have either seen leaf-footed bugs or it could be the assassin bug.
Okay,
The nymphs are both
scary.
Yeah, the nymphs. Well, that's a good one. You know, that's one of the
assassin
predators.
bug
Right.
is good. Okay.
So.
Well, I'll go over there and see if I see it, and if I see it, I'll grab one.
Okay, sure. Yeah, we can go over and look at it. Yeah.
These are squash bug eggs.
Click on you get a search.
It does.
Okay, it's hiding because it knows we're about to. Okay, do you see
Following her rule, then let's see what it is.
see it coming around?
Oh yeah, okay. Let me have a good. See, I can tell it's a bug pest, but not which one. What I call a bug, you know, a true bug.
Maybe you can reach in there and grab it.
Let's stick him around.
Yep.
Well, I won't grab him until I know which one he is.
That.
I think. I'm still not sure. I think that's an immature leaf-footed bug. In fact, I'm pretty sure it is. So it would be a pest.
He's a little bit bigger than he was a couple of days ago, maybe.
See how his back legs are flaring out a little bit? Yeah, so he will be...
That's a bad one. He's hard to get. Now, are they going to hurt me if I grab him?
No, he probably won't bite. But, you know, the others that look like that,